It's been over 20 years since Fred Rogers, the loved host of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, died. In that time, his reputation has only gotten bigger. He's become more than a children's television host. It's a cultural icon, a symbol of being nice, kind, and caring in a world that's becoming more mean. His words, "Won't you be my neighbor?" still echo in the hearts of those who grew up with his calm voice and cardigan sweaters. But now, 20 years after his death, his family has begun to speak honestly about the man behind the myth. And what they've told us makes things more complicated, and in some ways goes against the loved image of Mr. Rogers. It's not shocking in the way tabloids want, but it is emotionally raw, deeply human, and at times upsetting. Truth, as they tell it, is not pretty. It's complex, the mask of being perfect. Fred Rogers created an image of being peaceful on screen. He was always gentle, patient, and morally good. He talked to children about hard subjects: death, divorce, race, war, with rare grace. To many, he wasn't just a TV host. He was like a parent, a teacher of values, a spiritual guide. But being perfect is a heavy burden to carry, especially for those closest to the person being put on a pedestal. His son, John Rogers, now in his 60s, broke the family's long silence during a recent sit-down conversation. "The world got Mr. Moxie Rogers," he said quietly. "We got Dad, and those were not always the same person." According to John, the father he knew was loving but distant, kind but demanding, generous but emotionally removed. He was never cruel, John clarified. But he was, unreachable. He lived in a sacred mental space where everything had to be calm. And if you disrupted that calm, even by accident, it was like you had broken something. For a child growing up in that kind of environment wasn't always peaceful. It was sometimes painfully quiet. Life inside the neighborhood. Fred Rogers' wife, Joanne, who died in 2021, reportedly once described their household as carefully managed. In private letters, the family has recently decided to share. She wrote of Fred's constant trying to keep spiritual balance, often at the expense of real emotional expression. He couldn't stand yelling. One letter reads, "Not just arguments. Any strong emotion upset him. We had to learn to handle everything quietly, even sadness." This emotional distance, the family suggests, wasn't mean cruelty. Rather, it was a result of Fred's extreme sensitivity, something that made him so good at understanding children's needs on camera, but less able to handle the messy parts of real family life. His niece, Laura Rogers, remembered visiting their home as a child. You couldn't be loud. You couldn't roughhouse. You always had to be appropriate. It was like living inside a museum dedicated to emotional restraint. She added, with love but honesty. He loved deeply. I don't doubt that. But he didn't always know how to show it in real time. His love came through rules, through structure, not hugs, faith, discipline, and the pressure to be good. Fred Rogers was a devoted Presbyterian minister. His faith was central to his worldview and to the moral universe of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. But that faith, his family says, came with its own set of difficulties. He had an almost impossible standard for himself. John said he believed he had a calling, not just as a TV personality, but as a moral example, and if he ever felt he had fallen short, even in the smallest way, he would torture himself. That pressure, John explained, spread outward. Family members weren't just expected to behave. They were expected to show the same quiet grace Fred did. That included always being polite, never raising your voice, and never showing pain or anger in a public setting. We weren't allowed to be messy humans. We were Rogerses. John described long conversations at the dinner table in which Fred would gently correct behavior or suggest more neighborly ways to express oneself. Over time, the corrections piled up into a sense that real feelings were unwelcome. It was like living with a lighthouse, John said. Always shining, always watching, and you started to feel like you had to be made of stone. It's the cost of being a saint. The public love for Fred Rogers only got stronger over the years. From documentaries to dramatized films, he's been made into a saintly figure. But that sainthood, his family says, came at a cost, not just to their private lives, but to Fred himself. He hated being idolized, Reese said, but he also feared letting people down. It crushed him to think that someone might feel disappointed by him, even for a second. This, they believe, led him to hold back many parts of himself, even harmless ones. He avoided sarcasm. He never gossiped. He didn't dance, didn't drink, and rarely enjoyed spontaneous fun. He was sincere to a fault, John added. He didn't know how to loosen up. Joy for him was structured like a scheduled puppet segment, not a spontaneous belly laugh. Over time, the perfection became isolating, according to letters and family accounts. Fred struggled in silence, with feelings of loneliness even when around those who loved him. He gave the world so much, Lara said. But sometimes I wonder if he saved any joy for himself. Why speak now? For years, the family chose silence. They didn't want to ruin his memory or confuse the public image of a man who had brought so much good into the world. But now, 2 decades later, they say the silence has become its own kind of lie. We're not doing this to attack him, John explained. We're doing it because we loved him. And loving someone means telling the truth, even when it's complicated. The family hopes their honesty will add depth to Fred Rogers' legacy, not make it smaller. He wasn't perfect. He was principled. There's a difference, and I think that difference makes his kindness more meaningful, not less. Lara said, public reaction, a divide. Predictably, the public response to the family's revelations has been mixed. Some longtime fans are deeply upset by the idea that Fred Rogers wasn't the perfect father figure they imagined. Others have expressed gratitude. I don't need Mr. Rogers to be perfect. One social media post read, I need him to be real. He struggled, but still chose kindness that makes him more heroic, not less. Psychologists and cultural critics have also weighed in, praising the family for shedding light on the emotional complexity of moral icons. We live in a time that craves role models, one commentator said, but we've confused goodness with perfection. Fred Rogers was good, but he was also a man with limitations. Recognizing that helps us find grace for ourselves, too. A legacy re-examined. Fred Rogers' legacy is secure, but it's changing. What the family has opened is not a scandal, but a conversation. A conversation about how we define kindness, about the cost of emotional perfectionism, and about the difference between public personas and private truths. His family doesn't want statues or sainthood. They want understanding. They want others to know that behind the camera was a man who tried sometimes too hard to be everything for everyone, and in doing so may have forgotten how to just be. He taught people to love themselves, John said. But I'm not sure he ever fully gave himself that same permission. Final thoughts. 20 years after his death, Fred Rogers still stands as a beacon of gentle wisdom. But the new revelations from his family cast a more complex light on that beacon. Not to dim it, but to show that it was held by human hands. He wasn't flawless. He wasn't always emotionally available. He struggled, he strained, and sometimes he failed. And maybe that's the real lesson we can learn from him now. It's not just to be kind, but to allow kindness to begin with honesty, even when the truth isn't pretty.